Welcome Under the Moongate. I'm Erin Bagwell, an intuitive medium, awakening witch, and documentary filmmaker. I'm sharing what I'm learning about living from the dead, with stories and interviews to inspire us to find the magic within. And I'm so excited today to welcome my dear friend, Christina Stathopoulos, who is a certified career coach, mother, and calls herself a choose-your-own-adventure witch. She talks to us about how her family played such an important part of her magical lineage, all about how we can balance moderation and magic, gives us some kitchen witch tips, and we talk about so much more. I'm so excited to welcome Christina. And before I get to the episode, I just want to send a little reminder. The workshop I'm hosting this Sunday about how to unlock your intuition and step into your psychic gifts. Tickets are still available. We've got a couple of them left, and I'd love to have you join me. If for some reason you are listening to this and you miss it, don't worry. We'll be back. I'll be doing more events. So stay tuned. Watch this space. I love doing the live events and getting to know and meet everybody. So, okay, without further ado, let's welcome Christina under the Moongate. Christina, welcome under the Moongate.
Erin, thank you for having me.
How are you, dear?
It's a morning after kiddo drop off, so I'm 30, flirty, and thriving, they say.
Wow. How are your mornings these days? They're crazy.
I like to say I'm in the next iteration of the life cycle. I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 7-month old at home.
Oh
And
man.
so, yeah, anyone who has little kiddos, they kind of know, especially with the baby, every couple of months, like you get into a rhythm and then the rhythm is completely disrupted
Broken.
and you have to start all over
Yeah.
again. So
Ugh.
those are my mornings.
I know, and yours are so little. My youngest is 3.
Hmm.
Oh, and three is an age, and then the babies are just it's a whole nother ball game. It's crazy.
Yep, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
I love it. How has your motherhood journey been while we're on the topic of kiddos?
Ooh, talking about cycles. Motherhood's been interesting. It's one of those paths that I always knew I wanted to walk.
Mm,
And then I had my first child and experienced some pretty severe postpartum depression and anxiety,
hmm.
which was really, really jarring and just like big identity crisis mode for me.
Sure.
Um, and so what's been interesting about welcoming a second little miracle into my life is in some ways, circumstantially, it's been harder,
Mm,
but how grounded I feel and how much like more in tune with myself I feel this go around is so much stronger and so much better that I still feel like I've been squeezing more joy out of the process this time around. So that's something I'm super grateful for.
yeah, there's something odd about doing it the second time where you know more and you know less. Like you know what to expect in terms of setting your expectations. Like you can kind of, or for me at least, I was able to surrender a bit more the second time and not have an expectation on sleep or how I was going to feel or how I was going to look or, all those things I could release more the second one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Surrender is an amazing word for it. I also just see it as when you go through it the first time, it's so new that everything feels really significant.
Mm,
And if nothing else, the second time around, even though every baby is different and every child is different, and as you know from like firsthand experience, going from 1 to 2 is a totally different ball game. Knowing that it's seasons,
mm.
like reframing it to think of like, okay, so we're just in one of the difficult seasons, and that's
Yeah.
okay
And
because
don't know that the first time. You think, oh, this
no,
is forever.
this is forever. And so, your ego just latches on to every single step of it. Like you're constantly
Mm,
looking for validation.
yeah.
The other thing I'll say is like before I got into my own work and journey and before I became a mom, I was definitely that like overachiever archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I came from this background of like constantly seeking external validation for my performance. And
Mm.
you become a parent, and that's not how it goes. Like your baby doesn't give you progress reports, your baby doesn't sign you on for a bonus if you're doing a good job. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is no like here's the metrics and the proof that you're good at this.
Mm.
And that could be so jarring if you rely on proof to carry yourself through life, you know?
Yeah, well, even when you're doing a good job, there is this doubt of like, well, am I? It's such a weird thing to quantify, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, so much, such a little ball of, wax, the motherhood process, and I want to pivot us a little bit. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I'm so excited to get into your whole journey. Christina is part of my meditation circle or coven or, whatever word we want to use. We gather pretty much once a week to meditate, to channel, and to really share kind of what is going on in our lives spiritually. And it's been such a gorgeous place to find community within this process. And I'm curious, you're newish to the group, and I haven't gotten a one-on-one with you before, so I'm excited to really get in and ask you all the questions. So, tell me about your background, how you grew up, was there any religion in sight? How did you kind of find your spirituality?
Yeah, great question. So, whenever I meet people for the first time and we have a spiritual conversation, I always joke, but not joke, that I identify as a witchy child of God.
Mm,
You know what I mean by that is I'm a first generation Greek American. And something that I find I take a ton of pride in with my Greek identity is on one hand, I was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, so with that Christian background and faith. And on the other hand, the Greek heritage is so wrapped in mysticism.
mm,
And growing up, I think what I found very fascinating was on one hand, I was, one of those kids that was going to church pretty much weekly on Sundays. But then around the house, I had, aunts and grandparents who clearly were doing things that certain Christians might frown or scoff at.
mm,
And so I think that's what was really rich about my upbringing was having this integration of both a very structured, organized religious faith, but
mm-hmm.
then also having these nods to things that were inexplainable or mystical or even magical in
Can
a
you
lot
give
of
us an
ways.
example of something the aunties and uncles might have been up to?
Yeah, so a great example is there are many women in my family who have been charged with taking what we know as the evil eye off of
Mm,
people. And there's even a lot of one thing that I love about being close with my family is I've asked them so many stories of previous relatives. And there is a story of, one of my great aunts who they believe the reason that she passed from dementia is because she didn't know how to protect herself. And so when she'd clear those energies off of people, she would take them on for herself.
oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think, I guess in like new age spiritualism, you'd see them as energy workers.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might describe them as protection witches.
Yeah.
Other people might describe them as healers, but to me, they were just my tias, like that's who they were.
Yeah. And did you ever go to them and say like, hey, like I have an aunt who calls herself like a white witch, which we would say like a positive witch now these days. But if I needed any spell work, I would call on her and say, "Hey, can you do a spell for me?" And she would kind of, tinker in the background and had a little book. Did you use them or lean on them for anything?
I did, absolutely. Yeah. In particular, my Thea Virginia, who was my maternal grandfather's sister, as well as her daughter, my cousin Zoe. To this day, I'll still text them. Like, I'll just say, like,
Mm,
something is not right. I think
yeah.
I need some clearing. And then what was really beautiful is about 2 years ago now, my Thea actually passed on what you might call a spell book to me. It was just a list of different prayers to help cleanse energy, and
Wow.
very much a ritual of like, hey, you do these specifically on Fridays. Here's what you do. Here's
Mm.
what you can burn. Um, so that sense of ritual has been with me my entire life, and that's something I'm really grateful for.
Wow, what an heirloom to have and to
Mm-hmm.
pass on. I remember reading, I think it's a book called Personal Magic, and they had also recommended to start writing down spell work or rituals and prayers and things. And um, I have a bunch of crazy notebooks. I try to when I channel, I write a lot. Um, but it's always my intention and my hope one day to like get it together to have like a beautiful book where I put like the most important things in that I can kind of pass on to whoever is open to it. Do you do any journaling or recording yourself?
I do, yeah. I go back and forth. I think that's just sort of the nature of being a neurospicy witch. I can never seem to stick with
Well, and a
one.
mom of two very young kids, what
Two
can we
young
do?
kids, neurospicy,
Mm-hmm.
just all of the above. It's a chaotic brew over
Yeah.
here. But I think one of the places that I first learned to really have reverence for recording things was in the kitchen, like learning how
Mm.
to cook and bake. And then in turn, learning how to garden to have the ingredients to cook and bake. Like I always tell people
Mm.
that was my first dabbling with spell casting in a lot of ways
Yeah.
because to me there it really is such a magical process to be intentional and deliberate with how you prepare your food, whether it's your main meals or desserts or anything in between. So that's actually where I spend a lot of my time journaling and reflecting.
Mm.
uh, Similarly, I was that student in the classroom who, as the teacher was lecturing, was usually doing something else. So most commonly, it's funny, I think nowadays people might even describe it as channeling, but oftentimes I would just do endless writing exercises. Like as the
Mm.
professor or the teacher was lecturing on something, I would just start dabbling down things that were coming to me through the lecture.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they had some connection to what was being discussed, but also very
Mm.
much their own thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You never know kind of what you're going to pull out when you kind of just allow your mind to go there
Mm-hmm.
and to float around. And I like what you were saying about being intentional in the kitchen because I think my husband would, I don't know if he would call himself a kitchen witch, but that's where his magic happens for sure. He loves the preparation. I wish I had that sliver. I'm not very good in the kitchen, but he can make the most beautiful things and like he's Italian and the love you put into your food is so important. It's definitely part of the spell work.
Absolutely.
So, when did you kind of start to get the confidence to start dabbling yourself? Was it just always a part of your life or was there any kind of big moments that pushed you one way or the other to really embrace your witchiness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in a lot of ways, my practices and routines have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I think for me, most notably, is when I finally felt the confidence or the certainty to come out of the closet, so to speak, with my
Mm-hmm.
witchiness.
Sure.
And it's interesting. For the last almost 10 years now, I've been a coach in private practice
Mm-hmm.
for leadership and life coaching. And when I went through my coach training program, there was actually an entire module on spirituality.
Oh, interesting.
And I remember because part of that module, we had the opportunity to be guided through a meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And the messages that I received in that experience were just so front and center, like through the front door, not taking any
Mm.
more of my excuses, not taking any more of my BS. And I think there was a lot of fear around that. Like I think I held it as very binary. Like
Mm.
either you're this very corporate executive person who is taken seriously through professionalism, or you run through the woods braless taking plant medicine and speaking in rhymes.
Sure.
And I don't mean that as an insult. Like I want to be clear, I very much am sharing that through my very wounded
Of
filter that I
course.
had at the
And
time.
who amongst us wouldn't love to run in the forest and have that be our full time?
Right.
existence.
Absolutely. But I couldn't see the integration point. Like I
Mm,
couldn't, and even I'm sure we could say in the last couple of years, as it seems like the divine feminine is coming in for more people, a call for dabbling in spirituality and mysticism and magic is coming more front and center and becoming more popularized. For so long that wasn't the case.
right.
And as voices have come out and started to emerge, again, I think the voices that I saw the most clearly were the ones who took very extreme stances.
Mm,
I want to be clear, those stances are so important and those teachers are so important, but I just couldn't connect with them.
mm-hmm.
And so it's really taken kind of finding my own middle road, so to speak. In Greek, they have the expression pan metron ariston, everything in moderation.
Mm,
And I really feel like that's a virtue that I live by, even in my witchcraft and even in integrating magic into my daily life.
mm. Will you say more about that?
Sure. So, it's funny. I think you and I have chatted a little bit about this, but I run a program called the Sensible Witch, and it's very much that idea where your everyday life can be filled with magic and ritual. And yes, of course, the origins of those teachings are super important. But, if you are a parent to young children, if you are someone who commutes an hour each way and then works 9 to 5, if you find yourself in a system where you don't have access or privilege to getting to go off into the woods for days at a time, or unfortunately don't have access to community. You
Mm,
don't have people around you to have your coven or have your safe space to practice and dabble. That it doesn't mean you don't get to have access to the work.
mm,
um, I vehemently believe that the most powerful magic on the planet is intention.
mm,
And so you can turn anything in your day into a spell, into an act of magic, into an opportunity to channel. It's really about, did you just create your intention with it?
mm. Can you give us an example of somebody who's listening who's like, okay, I want to integrate everyday magic in my life. What could that look like? Like, what's an example of how you could set your intention and create a little magic?
Sure. So I think one of my favorite examples is, as I mentioned, had a crazy morning, dropped off the kids, got back
Mm-hmm.
here. You can make fixing your morning cup of coffee a moment of magic.
Mm,
And again, even if you're listening and you're like I think people go straight to like, okay, so you have to brew your coffee yourself. And yes, that could be an amazing ritual and routine. But even if you're the average person who's so busy, you're just popping in an espresso pod, that's okay. Like pop in your pod, take a moment to deliberately choose which mug you're going to drink out of for that day.
mm,
And you get to say why you chose it. I have mugs in my collection that remind me of the people who gifted them to me. I have mugs that are funny or whimsical, and I want to bring some whimsy into my day. And you may be listening and thinking, like, that sounds so trite. And sure, if you believe it's trite or pointless, it's not going to work.
mm,
But if you
mm-hmm.
believe taking 30 seconds to purposefully choose your mug rather than grab the nearest one, to purposefully choose which pod you're going to stick in your automated coffee machine, to even, like, I can't tell you the power of even taking 3 minutes to just
Mm.
sit in silence with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea as it stays warm. Like that in and of itself can radically shift your day and can be a point of magic for you in that day.
I love that you bring up the coffee because something that I do is when somebody in my family passes away, I ask for a coffee cup from their house. And
Mm.
so I have this collection. I think I've got 6 mugs now of people, grandparents, great grandparents, aunts who've passed. And then when I go and get my cup of coffee for the morning, um, usually I'll just kind of pick randomly and then I'll always just say hi to that person. Hi, Uncle Ron, nice to see and kind of have like a little inner dialogue of, hi, how's it going? The other thing is I used to have this like mushroom tincture that was really great for the morning. And when I would pop it into the coffee, I would try to set an intention for the day or declare a wish, or do you know what I mean? Like the act of adding it became like this little ritual that I did for a while until the tincture ran out. And then I
Right.
forgot about it. But
And
um,
again, like even for like if there are people out there who want to start ritual or routine and they hear words like intention or wish and they're like, that's too loosey goosey for me, or I don't know what
mm,
that means yet. Like,
yeah.
if nothing else, spend your first 3 sips just noticing what you're drinking. Like,
Mm,
how does it feel when the coffee hits your lips? Is it too hot? Is it just right? What does it taste like? Like, even just sitting back and absorbing the moment and just being present to the moment and not in the past, oh my God, I'm running late, and not in the future, oh my God, I have so much to do today, but just this like singular moment.
mm,
Like that in and of itself to me is magic.
definitely. And I'm wondering, just thinking a little bit about what you said about your family lineage and about the protection spells, I feel like there's a lot we could go into there. Do you have a basic protection mantra or prayer or something that maybe people who are curious about adding some protection to their practice? What's
Mm.
something you would recommend for them to do or where to start with that?
One of the most protective things you can do is just think about the energy in your body.
Mm,
So I think so often in particular, like many of us sit at desks all day, like taking a single moment to purposefully ground in. And what I
mm,
mean by that is just like adjust your sit bones, put your feet truly flat on the ground. If you want to do it barefoot, but if you want to keep your slippers or socks on, I get it. It's the winter. That's totally okay. And just like as you inhale, have that picture that you are inhaling all that is good and exhaling all that is out.
mm,
Like that's step one. And then step two, I always think of the child expression, I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever
mm-hmm,
bounces off of me sticks to you. A practice I was given by a relative that really resonates for me is this thought of setting up almost like a wall of mirrors around you. Like,
mm.
have, like, if you want to visualize it, you can almost think of like if you're being put in an igloo or being put in a disco ball. And
Yeah.
this idea that every mirror is facing outward, so that
Mm,
any negativity that might come at you that day is just going to bounce right back. It's not going to come into you. It's just going to reflect off of these beautiful prisms you've surrounded yourself with
hmm.
and go right back to where they came from. If nothing else, pretending you're living your day in a disco ball, that's like protection 101 that I
That
can't
sounds
like more highly
fabulous.
recommend. Yeah.
I have a friend who has a crazy neighbor, and the neighbor is like a convicted animal felon. And I was in conversation with her trying to figure out how we could maybe set up a boundary from her property to the next property. Do you have any thought? And it's interesting you brought up mirror because I was thinking, should we get a little mirror and put it on the house so that it reflects the energy? Or do you have any thoughts on ways we could protect or ground a physical space like a house?
Oh my God, yes.
Okay.
Mirrors, connected to that, one of the funny things about me, I was that person when we had the privilege of looking into buying a home. I went into every house with a compass to see which direction the windows were facing.
Okay.
And I mentioned that because she might go ahead and take a look at where sunlight projects on her home versus her neighbor's home at which time of days.
Okay.
And I say that because it can be super powerful to set up a mirror somewhere in the home so that sunlight is constantly being cast as almost like a both a clearing energy and also like a protective energy towards the boundary of their property.
Mm, okay.
Yeah,
And
so
when you were walking through your houses with a compass, did you want a certain facing house, or you just were curious about where the windows were going, or what was your?
yeah, so a little bit of both. In my perfect world, which I was fortunate enough to manifest, I wanted a home where the sun rose with the kitchen.
Okay.
I start my day in the kitchen with my family. We're having breakfast, we're getting lunch boxes ready for school. So for me, like that the day starts in this very ritualistic place and the sun rises beginning there.
Mm-hmm.
And then similarly, as like we move towards our master bedroom, the sun sets with the master bedroom. So naturally,
Mm.
like the day ends as the sun sleeps.
Wow, what a
Um,
great tip for people who are buying a home to just even think about where the light is going to be in their house. That's so helpful.
Right. And again, like, look, not everyone can find that perfect east west
Mm-hmm.
paradigm, but
Sure.
like, this is what I mean when I say intention is very powerful magic. Like, I'm a plant. I know I need daylight. I know that that
Mm.
matters to me. So even if you're in a home where you can't control where your windows are or where light comes through, things like mirrors, things like switching out really dark blinds for either sheer blinds or those cool decals you could stick on windows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like intentionally setting up your spaces so that it cultivates the energy in your home that you wish to have can be
Mm.
super nourishing and super protective.
How do you keep your house functioning while having two small children?
I surrender to the chaos.
Okay, all right.
No, I mean, look, entropy is the natural state of the universe. Children are very in tune with entropy and chaos, as it may
Mm-hmm.
be. I think I was telling someone this, like, the fact is, my home is full of messes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, if we walked outside this office room, you would see toys over here and clothes over there and crumbs over here and what have you. Um, I think what matters the most to me is letting go of the expectation that intention only works if you fulfill it perfectly,
Mm.
and more so like sitting in, hey, how does this feel? Because there are times where the amount of clutter does feel energetically dissonant for me.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I actually like need to stop what I'm doing and clean just to feel the energy in the space shift.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other times where it's just like, yeah, the house is a mess because I just had an amazing afternoon playing with my kids. Whoop de doo. Like
Yeah, you can more
it's gonna
easily let it
happen.
go.
Mm-hmm.
What other active spell work are you up to over there? I know we've talked about altars and crystals. Is there anything else that like really inspires you or is part of your practice?
Yeah, so for me, I am a really, and I know you're the same, I'm a big lover of card readings. I've always been called to it. What's really funny is as a kid, there was a show on TV, Cardcaptor Sakura, and it was literally a little girl who used cards filled with magic.
Mm.
And I remember wanting her deck book, like more than anything. And I actually, like, I have this distinct
What a
memory at
great
like,
children's show.
it was. But I have like such a clear memory of like 10 or 11 years old, my mom buying me this deck book and me just
Mm.
sitting in my room drawing cards and pretending they meant
Mm.
something.
Cool.
And so like card reading is a huge part of my day. As I shared before with you, like I'm a choose your own adventure kind of witch. So sometimes it's as simple as just drawing a single card over that cup of coffee. Sometimes it's a more elaborate drawing the card and setting up an altar space to honor the messages that I'm receiving.
Mm.
This time of year, I don't know about you, but I love getting ready to kind of do that year ahead spread, looking towards all of the messages and intentions for the new year. Yeah, it's just one of my favorites. I studied English in college, so a lot of like literary analysis, and to me, that science of understanding the meaning behind what's in front of you is very in tune with like intuitive reading practices.
Now, for people who don't know, what is a year ahead spread? What's that look like?
Oh, great question. So, a year ahead spread is kind of what the name implies, which is you are doing a spread of cards to look ahead to the next year. Um, so there's probably many different layouts out there. The one that I'm the most familiar with that resonates and feels really good to me is it's 13 cards,
Hmm.
12 to represent each month of the year. So January through December, and then usually laid out in a circle. And a final card in the middle, that 13th card representing an overall theme for the
Mm.
coming year.
I love the number 13 too,
Me
instead of the
too.
12, just to kind of honor the goddess and how many months we should have if, our calendar was more matriarchal.
Absolutely. Well, and it's perfect. I was reflecting on the space that I created for my spread last year, and the theme that I got in that 13th card was around grounding.
Hmm.
So really spending 2024 shoring up my foundation and staying, grounded and in tune and confident with myself, which what a perfect theme to be working with, especially as I navigated the end of the pregnancy, birth, the early months postpartum, returning to work, just all these different cycles that I went through and returning back to how do I ground? How do I center? How do I return to myself over and over again?
Hmm. I'm reminded I did a year ahead spread with Rebecca Allman from the beautiful podcast Voices in the River. And she is a witch who pulled my cards. And now I'm curious to go back and listen to that reading and see kind of month by month how it kind of resonated and what messages are in there. I'm curious as a mom, are there any magical practices you guys do together with your kids? And are they kind of involved in any of the fun rituals that you're up to?
There are, yeah. So it's pretty commonplace now with my 3.5 year old that she'll draw cards with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very fun. Like I purposefully keep it really organic because I think young children are just so in touch with their intuition.
Now, are you
So,
pulling oracle cards or tarot cards?
I do a mix. It really
Okay,
depends on my
how you're feeling?
how I'm feeling for the day. Year ahead spread, I do often return to tarot,
Mm-hmm.
um, just because of all of the ritual and guidance and parameters that come with tarot.
Sure.
But it's really fun. We'll draw cards and I'll just ask her up front what she thinks the card means or what she likes about the card or what she
Mm.
notices about the card. Gratitude is a really common practice in our household. Uh, she she describes it. She knows that mommy loves her shiny things,
Mm.
which is more that she's aware of a lot of the crystals that I keep in my collection and that I have as spiritual tools. And so, as she's becoming a little more careful with things like the concept of what's fragile and what's delicate, I've been letting her come in. One of my favorite things to do is just let her choose from one of my polished tumbles
Mm.
and then create a little story for like what that tumble is telling us.
Mm. That's fun. I'm sure you get all kinds of fun stories.
Oh my god, I joke and not joke that my 3.5 year old, my daughter, it's like she was born with all of her past lives intact
Mm.
because she just says these things that I know she didn't hear from someone else, but they don't make there's no reason why a 3.5 year old should be thinking in that regard.
Yeah. It's interesting what they retain. I feel like when they're so little, they're kind of in between both worlds,
Mm-hmm.
until kind of culture and the world, and then they kind of become more present in their bodies.
Right.
But I've definitely observed that too. I'm wondering how your partner feels about your witchcraft and what his spiritual experience is like.
My husband Paul, uh, it's kind of funny. We kind of have a running joke that he's almost like a muter of spiritual activity. Like he doesn't have a lot of spiritual experiences. He was raised Catholic, but doesn't necessarily align with, that more organized religious faith. Um, but it does get to the point where even though he himself doesn't go through daily life thinking about ritual or magic, like he feels the impact of what I do in our home.
Cool.
Most notably, as I mentioned, I'm definitely like a kitchen witch. And so he'll say things like you need to make broth. Like I need your broth. I need
Mm,
this healing. He'll come home some days and be like, I don't know what's on me or what it means, but like, can you smudge me? Like, I definitely feel like
yeah.
something's out of alignment or something's out of whack. So, we kind of joke that it's like a witch with benefits. Like, he doesn't have to do any of the practices himself, but he gets a lot of the benefits.
Yeah, I hear that. My husband, it's funny, he was born on Halloween, so I call him a warlock. Although he doesn't really, he's very psychic, but he wouldn't use that word or say that. But we were chatting the other day about work and he was like asking all these questions and I was like, "Well, let's get the guides out. Like let's get the cards. Let's get, the notebooks and let's get it all going." So, it's fun to include the people closest to you kind of in some of the magic that happens. I'm curious, do your friends and family know about your gifts? Are they knocking on the door saying, "Hey, can you smudge me?" Or, you know, are they texting you saying, "Can you pull a card for me?" Or kind of how does that work?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say it's a mix. I feel really fortunate. I don't have anyone that's like, oh my God, we got to burn you at the stake.
Mm,
None, I wouldn't say anything like extremely negative.
yeah.
I think there's a generation of family members that are like, that's nice.
Mm,
Then there's a generation of family members that feel proud or excited. They're always like, Christina made an oracle deck. Do you want to buy it? Da, 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 da. And then I do have a few close friends and family. What I find the most interesting is they don't necessarily seek me out for spells or for clearing. It's more they seek me out when they're like, something really weird happened to me, and you're the person in my
mm.
life that I
Oh,
feel
I
like
can
I
tell.
can work through this with. Which is really beautiful and fun because usually on the other side of working through that, there may be some kind of service that I get to provide for them.
Hmm.
But I think it just speaks to in general, like people get hungry for that sense of community or that sense of like normalizing something that they're experiencing.
Yeah, they want validation that they're not
Right.
crazy. Speaking of the witch wound, did you feel like you had to work through that kind of narrative at all of being afraid of practicing or being intuitive?
My previous iteration of this lifetime, I was very much that classic overperforming, overachiever archetype, learned that proof was the most important, good performance was the most important, getting straight A's was the most important, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And so for a long time, my
Are you the
spiritual,
oldest daughter?
I am, yep,
Okay.
oldest daughter, of course, oldest
Guilty. Yep.
daughter, immigrant family, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. But, for the longest time, my spiritual practice felt like it was something for me in private to comfort myself.
Hmm.
And the thought that it could be a part of who I am in community and in professional spaces and all of those things, like that's where it felt very scary or even very dangerous to me and really confronting.
Yeah.
I think both through, you know, I've hinted at this in our meditation group a couple times. Like, on one hand, it's the wound of feeling like the imposter, like, oh my
Hmm.
God, I'm going to be around other practitioners and they're going to realize I'm full of horse shit and I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm a faker. Um, and then on the flip side, being with, muggles or normies or whatever you want to call them, that fear of like, oh, they're going to reject me for this. They're not going to
Hmm.
understand me. They're going to treat me differently. And so, that pendulum of, well, I'm so legit, people are going to be scared of it, or this is all made up and I'm going to get called a faker.
Yeah.
is definitely the work that I had to take on to heal.
Mm. And how do you think you worked through that? Like, what was the process of that?
I think it's twofold. I think for one, you know, I think what's so divine about the practice of magic, however you're calling it, is it points to how connected we all are.
Hmm.
And so I think ultimately, I do believe a part of it requires community. Like it actually
Mm.
requires you to be willing and commune with others in the practice, which is terrifying, right? Because of what I just said. You're either going to get burned at the stake or get called a faker. Like that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also so necessary. And so I feel like for me, part of how I worked to heal that wound was to actually just like rip the scab off and like swim around in it, like putting myself
Mm.
in spaces, I remember taking a Reiki attunement training just to be around other people who are interested, taking a soulful facilitation course just to be around other people who are interested, saying
Yeah.
yes to joining the group
Mm-hmm.
recently as like the next iteration of that. Um, I think magical practice and healing the witch wound is not too dissimilar from strength training.
Mm.
Don't, if you've never done it a day in your life, don't be surprised if you can't lift 100 pounds or if you do it and then you're horribly sore the next day. It's going to take conditioning and strengthening and building up stamina. And so that's been my process, is building up the stamina, slowly allowing more people in and truly seeing me, slowly integrating more and more of it into my work. Most recently, I would say people see that in me from a professional sense of just like allowing those messages that are coming in that don't necessarily make sequential sense in a conversation to just show up and trust that they will be of value to someone or of service to them.
Mm. I really, what you said about community resonates so strongly because it's something that I've been, I think, just reflecting a lot about kind of the witch in the woods and how there is this kind of narrative and folklore around the woman who's by herself who practices magic and what that means. But I feel like in our connective collective, I mean, humans love to be around each other and we love those touch points and those moments. And even that witch in the woods, had people knocking on her door, asking her questions, and having them take a look at their livestock to heal them and to get herbs and things. So it's such an interesting part of our journey to allow ourselves the ability to let people see us, for lack of a better way to phrase it. Is there any other, do you have any other favorite spiritual stories or happenstances or things that that, when those things happen either after meditation or, something happens that seems like a crazy coincidence? Um, Anything coming to mind as any favorite stories to share?
Ooh, there's so many. How do I even pick a single one? I think since we're on the note of community, I'll share a story about getting a chance to meet you and find this meditation group community that we're in together,
Mm-hmm.
which is, as I said, like I've taken on the strength training approach to healing my witch wound, a little bit at a time, a little bit more at a time, a little bit more at a time. And so when I did that year ahead spread last year, and I received so many messages around finding community, staying grounded, so many messages around receiving. I think that's the
Mm.
other thing is I think part of my witch wound is feeling like it's okay so long as it serves other people
Mm-hmm.
versus like getting to be served or receive gifts from others.
Mm.
um Always very confronting for me, again, oldest daughter syndrome, I'm sure. but I share that because after I did that reading, I felt called to create a grid for myself out of some of my crystal specimens that was meant to call in feminine community, because that was something that I felt like I've struggled with creating for a couple of years now. And so I just laid out and I played and I put in all of these stones that represent softness and healing,
Mm.
femininity and connection and heart. And, beautifully, as I was getting ready to return from my parental leave, our mutual friend reached out to me and invited me to the group that you and I are now both a part of. And so, in so many ways, I've found joining that group is exactly what's next in my strength training regimen, so to speak.
Mm.
It's very much that practice week to week of letting other people step up and step in to channel and to guide us through healing and guide us through meditation, and not have to show up myself with the like, all right, everyone, I'm here and here's the value that I'm going to contribute to the
Mm.
group to be
Yeah.
allowed to stay here and to be a real member. um so yeah, I thought I'd share that one, is even if you feel like you don't know how to start in creating connections, start with what you do know, which for me was playing with some shiny rocks and feeling good about that.
Yeah. Tell me more about this grid that you created.
Sure. So, for anyone, when I say a grid, what I really mean is laying out small crystal specimens in a pattern or formation.
Mm-hmm.
In some practices, people are familiar with like mandalas as an example of this. Other people are familiar with sacred geometry. If you prefer more childlike explanations, you could think of like tangrams, like fitting pieces together to make a shape.
Mm.
But
So they're
crystal,
connecting.
right.
Got it.
But crystal gridding can be this really beautiful practice of taking messages that are resonating with you and putting them in a tangible form to help call them into your life.
Mm.
So for me, like I said, I had all these themes of femininity and receiving and community and connection. And so I just picked out some specimens in my collection and created a circular symbol, because for me, again, that interconnectedness, and laid these things out in a beautiful pattern that to me represented almost like a transmutation circle in a way. Like, okay, this is
Mm.
the symbol, this is the spell I'm casting to bring in this community that I'm seeking.
I love everyone's methods of kind of manifesting through the physical. I'm very drawn to, the way altars are made and grids. And I think it's so lovely to kind of hear people's expression of how they're building things and putting things together. Or anything maybe you want young witches to know on their spiritual journey?
Ooh. You know what I would say for young witches out there, or even, and when I say young witch, I don't even just mean age. I
Sure.
actually just mean like wherever you are in your lifetime that you're finally feeling this itch or feeling this call.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just let yourself.
Mm.
It's not it's not going to hurt as bad as you might think it's going to.
Or that it has in a past life.
Right. And
I
if
have
nothing
to
else,
constantly
like,
remind myself it's 2024. You're okay. You're safe.
yeah,
You're safe.
absolutely. And I really do feel like as a collective, young practitioners are being called to get to win. Like, this is
Mm.
the time now more than ever. It's trendy to be spiritual, or it's welcomed, or it's become part of, consumerism and people's storefronts. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be really clear, like, you don't need to get duped into spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on tools or courses or equipment. But, you know, take notice of local spaces filled with creatives that allow a meditation group once a month. Reach out to your favorite podcasters and see if they host online communities and just talk to people online. I've met so many of my closest coven mates online these days because,
Sure.
when you're separated by geography, that's what you get to have. Just let yourself dabble, let yourself explore. Like I said, I'm a choose your own adventure witch. If structure and rules are supportive and nurturing for you, then that's amazing. But if you find them limiting or scary, or intimidating, then don't start there. Just start with leaning into what feels good, leaning into what you're being called to do, and you'll find your tools and your methods and your people to make it happen.
Following the breadcrumbs. That's what I always think about. Those little pieces that keep leading you further and further in.
Nice. Yeah.
Christina, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you? How can they support you? Can we still buy your Oracle deck?
You can still buy my Oracle deck. Yeah. So you can find me at hearherroar.net, which is both my coaching website. It's where I sell my Oracle deck. If you prefer, you can purchase it through Etsy. It's called the Sensible Witch Oracle. You can find me on Instagram at hearxtinaroar. Or you could just find me in the cosmos. If you
And
ask
what's
for
go
me, I'm sure we'll find each other.
and what's going on with your sensible witch course? Is that something that's ongoing or is it seasonal?
Yep. So I usually launch a cohort a quarter. So I'm actually just wrapping up my winter cohort. And so the next one will probably get started in March, right around when, the first signs of spring are popping up. So if you want details about that, you could always, follow my accounts or join my mailing list, whatever feels best to get information.
What a fun thing to start the new year as kind of like this fresh class where you're kind of getting in touch with your intuition. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your gifts, sharing your story, sharing your advice. It's been such a pleasure to have you, and I know our listeners will gobble up all the information you shared.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been an honor.
Under the Moongate is produced and hosted by me, Erin Bagwell, with music by Sal Mastrocola. To get bonus episodes, links to my workshops, and new episodes delivered to your inbox, join me as a Substack subscriber at underthemoongate.substack.com. To book a digital reading with me, submit a question for our Q&A episode, or RSVP to our next live event, scroll down in the show notes to get all the links. And pass the magic along. Share this episode with a friend. It would mean the world to me. Thanks so much for listening.